Welcome back to another episode of Out of Bounds on the Boomer Bust channel, a podcast where I give my social commentary on different topics in today's society. I'm your host, Terry, and today we want to unpack this situation. I think there's a lot to talk about and a lot to, I guess, just pull apart in this. So recently there was a story about a student who had a post on TikTok that they deemed quote unquote racist. Well, I wouldn't say TikTok did, but her university did, and I guess people that saw it. And since she was wearing her college shirt, they hit the school up, and the school ended up not rescinding her enrollment, but I guess unenrolling her, basically kicking her out of school. And schools can do that. Schools can say you violate our policy. That's grounds to be, unenrolled. So they can do that. But that's essentially what happened. And in the times we are in now, a lot of people are being quote unquote canceled for different things. And so it may not seem like that big of a deal, or you might think on the surface like, yeah, that makes sense. But the question for me is, when I saw this, is like, is that actually racist what she did? So here's what the post was on TikTok, or the video, whatever, is it was essentially her doing three different, not poses, but quick little videos. One was when black people kill black people, or when a black person kills another black person, and it's her just kind of looking around. It's when a black person kills a white person, her kind of looking around, looking at her watch. And then it was like when a white person kills a black person, and then like the whole background was on fire and she was like screaming and stuff, basically trying to say that we don't have the same reactions if it's not black on white violence, or specifically if it isn't a white person doing violence to a black person. And so in that, you can obviously see some people might think that's problematic, not true, whatever. But the question for me immediately, is that really racist? And does that warrant her being, now, I don't think it warrants her being kicked out of school. Like, even if it was, crazy offensive or whatever, I don't think that's the answer. So I'm not really asking that question. Really, the question is what she said, was the thought that she was putting out there racist? Like, I'm not putting her school and her name, like, you can figure that out pretty easily, because it's not essentially about her. It's more the bigger idea. And so what's going on here? This idea that we don't react the same if it's not a white person doing violence to a black person. To that, I have to agree. I don't think that is at all refutable. Now, there's a couple things that you have to take into the consideration and understand the context of it, though. And number one is the power and the part that the media plays. And this is typically something that people that are more conservative will blame the liberal side for, where they say that the liberal media or whatever. But I think more and more media likes clickbait, period. And I've talked a lot about bad journalism in today's age. Journalism's horrible now. No integrity, no nothing. And so there's a lot of push, though, about certain media outlets, but I would say because we have more access, that you'll get access to a lot of different media, and typically sometimes they do tend to be liberal leaning, or at least pander to. And so a lot of times people will be like, well, the way that media spin stuff, or they choose to cover stuff, they really incite and, put fans to the flames of racial tension. And I think that's definitely true. I mean, I think there's conservative media that reports certain things in a certain way to make a spin to sound like what they want. But again, both were guilty. But when it comes to this specific issue, you do see it played up, and you to me it's sad, because I think on one side they want to play it down, and one side they want to play it up, and it's sad that it has to be made into a political agenda when it can't just be somebody that was wrongfully, killed. But to that point, again, when we're talking about how they report it, but mostly what they report, I've rarely ever seen, without me having to look for it, a story about anything that wasn't a white cop or a white person versus a black person. Now, I was shocked when the Atlanta cops that harassed the students were black cops. I was honestly, without looking into it, I would have thought they were white cops. But when you looked into it and they were black cops, I was shocked. I'm like, because usually, not that it doesn't happen, but they don't report it. And so here's the problem, is the people that have enough awareness, they're like, you're just creating a narrative by leaving out certain stories. And people that don't have awareness, they start to see that as reality. So you got people on one side that see only thing they see is white cops or white people versus black people. And they think like, wow, this is like the biggest thing happening right now. And then you got people on the other side that never see, anything but black people shown as criminals or threats and blah, blah, blah. And they think that's what's happening right now. So people get mad about this stuff not because of what it says to us, but what it says to the uneducated people that just take the word for the media. So the media plays a big part in that, as far as the outrage, because a lot of people aren't just outraged straight up. They get outraged after they see the momentum build, and the momentum doesn't build about things that aren't reported. So the media plays a part in that. Now, the other part that you need to consider is that, as I'm even me mentioning examples, a lot of times it's cops, especially right now. And I've heard this we've all heard the discussion. Like, how come people are marching and upset about cops killing black people, but they don't even care about black people killing black people? Or if Black Lives Matter, how come you're not fighting against that? Now, again, Black Lives Matter was created specifically in the issues of race and police brutality. It's not an all-encompassing black movement of everything black and all issues black. The organization itself specifically was born of and started about with the idea of police brutality in mind. That's number one. Number two, there are people that do a lot to fight against gun violence and black on black crime. A, is not reported. Again, with the media, they don't show that stuff. But B, it's true, it's not as strong as something like this. That part is true, and I'll get to that later. But the most important thing is cops are held to a different standard. And so would I like it if a regular citizen didn't kill another regular citizen? Or if a citizen wasn't trying to kill another citizen and they killed people's children? Yes, that's horrible as well. But when you're talking about crime, criminal stuff like that, or even if it's not even a crime, maybe it's just two people fighting and it escalated. When you're talking about stuff like that, they're only held to their own standards and they'll do what they have to do. But when you're talking about cops specifically, it is a person that has taken a job where you are held to a higher standard, where you know that you need to be better than the person across from you, and you need to exercise more control, and that your job is to make us feel safe. I mean, you could say that about anything. Anything. Like if you're a teacher and you're like in your classroom smoking crack, and it's like, well, why are you smoking crack? And you're like, well, everybody, how come you're not mad about the guy outside smoking crack. Why are you mad about me smoking crack? He's doing it too. And it turns to this little kid thing. They're doing it too. Why are you mad at me? You're just deflecting. And because you are a role model, you're held to a different standard. So again, if two people get into a fight outside and they end up pulling guns and they kill each other, that's terrible. But if the president is outside getting into a fight with somebody and he pulls out a gun and kills somebody, that's a whole nother level. You're held to something different. And so when we're talking about the outrage of black on black crime versus white on black police brutality, it's understandable that there's a natural inclination to be a lot more upset about that. So there's that part. Now, the other part of this conversation, is it racist to think that, to observe that, to say that? First of all, yes, I will say that ignorance I wouldn't say it doesn't excuse, it doesn't erase racism. Like, if you truly believed that your race was superior, and it wasn't like a malicious thing. We've seen this in slave movies and stuff. It's like, yo, this is the way it is. I don't know what to say, but I'm still going to go about it as decent as I can. Now, does that mean that you're not racist? Yeah, of course you're still racist, but you're racist for a different reason. There's straight ignorance. You haven't learned more. And obviously I'm talking about something that might happen a long time ago. But that's different than somebody like today that is like, okay, I read this stuff and I'm like, we're the superior race. But I've never talked with black people. I never listen to the counter arguments, or I don't actually read any science that disproves this, or I don't have conversations. Now you're being willfully ignorant, or you're doing it on purpose. Either way, you're racist, but the intentions is different. And so that I will say, ignorance does not erase, the truth. But in this case, I don't think she was being racist. I don't think it's racist to observe and point that out. Even if on her surface level, she's like, bro, that's just how it is. People hypocritical. She might be wrong where she didn't consider all the factors that I'm talking about, but that still doesn't make her racist. And again, I've said this before and I'll keep saying it. We have a problem with lumping racism and conflating it with other terms. The difference between bias, prejudice, discrimination, and racism is very important. So is it, to some degree, is it a bias? Is it a prejudice? A little bit. But again, it wasn't a shot at black people. It wasn't a shot at any one particular person. It's a shot at our society and how we see, or how she sees it, reacting to certain things. Now, if it was like black people react this way, then we'll have a different, discussion. But at its very core, it's a bias to some extent. But again, it's still her talking about society at large and observing what society does in reaction to it. So that's one thing. To say it's racist, that's too far for me. Racism is very deep, it's very systematic, and it's funny, people argue it, but they still push for the definition to be changed to include systematic and to be systematic. But then people argue with me when I say racism is systematic. It is. Racism is deep, man. It is super deep. Like, people throw this, oh, you you rolled your eyes at a black person, that's racist. You walked across the street, well, I wouldn't say that because that kind of is, but just any little thing, they want to call it racist. It's not all racist. A lot of time it's prejudice. It's bad information in which you form an opinion on. Racist is really contributing and using the systems that we put in place to dehumanize and to criminalize a whole race. And so I don't think that's what she was doing. What she was doing was talking about what she saw from her side. Now, this idea of how we react with black on black crime or black on white crime. And again, I said the media is a part and the police is a part, but at the heart of it, there is truth. And people know that. I've talked about this before. People know this, especially people, I would say mainly the African-American community, because this is not an issue that's all black people. But within the African-American culture, like, we know that. And people talk about the crime against us and, all that stuff. The problem is when people try to twist it and use it as an excuse to dismiss how we feel about the police situation or other situations. That's not an excuse. You can feel pretty strongly about both, or you can feel more strongly about one. Like, it doesn't make it less right or less wrong, I should say. You're like, oh, well, you weren't mad at black on black crime, so you don't get to be mad about police. That's silly for the reasons I already said. But on top of that, people have to realize that you have a group of people whose history has been, as I said, dehumanized, being defamed, being silenced, being just twisted and portrayed as one way for our whole history, to where whatever we say is not valid. And so, or whatever we do could be used against us. And so I feel like, and I'm not speaking for everybody, but from what I understand in my experience, we kind of have an unwritten code where you just don't say that around people that's not us, because that's just giving them ammo. Like, internally amongst ourselves, we'll say, yeah, like, the black on black crime is an issue, or we'll say that, the bad parenting is an issue, the drugs is an issue. We'll talk about all those issues, but we understand the larger picture of how the cycle creates those issues. And so we can talk about it amongst ourselves. Whereas if we talk about it openly, it's just ammo for people to turn it around and be like, see, it's bad and it's black on black crime. So we get to dismiss whatever else you're talking about. And that's not what we're looking for. So a lot of times, if it's black people defending black people, they're going to be stout. They're not going to give you that ammo to throw back at them. And it's with good reason, because history has shown us that that's what people will do. So it's not that the conversation never happens about black on black crime, or that we're blind to it, or that we just walk around it. No, those conversations happen all the time. They just happen in-house. Now, what I will say, even though that's true, we don't do as much. We don't get as riled up as much. Now, part of that is being desensitized to what has happened over all these years. A lot of people have grown up in these areas, and those that didn't grow up in these areas have seen those depictions on TV, through movies, through shows, through news. And so at some point, just like now that we have internet and video, we see black men getting killed, or black people getting killed by cops so much, people get desensitized and they're over it. And then everybody's just like, well, okay, yeah, it sucks. It happens. And so that's part of the reason. And then there's a lot of other reasons too. But I will agree, we don't get up and rally like we do. That's not to say that it never happens. I see people posting, especially in Chicago, they're like, look at this rally that happened. Like, see? And it's like, yes, it happens. I know there's things that happen, but it's not as constant. And again, it's not covered on the media, but it's not as constant, because especially if you're in the issues in the community, you don't need the media to tell you. Like, especially in this day and age, you got all these social media platforms. You would know if this was a constant thing. You would know if there's, constantly as much movement with black on black crime as it is with Black Lives Matter. And it's not. And even if it was, it hasn't struck the chord that Black Lives Matter has. It hasn't made change in the name of it like Black Lives Matter has. So and people are like, well, this isn't about Black lives. This is about the cops. And it's about both. But yeah, mostly police brutality. And so I could give up that part. I could say that, yeah, it's not ever as big of a deal as some of this stuff has been. And nothing has been a big of a deal as this current protest because Corona. I mean, I've said that. People have never had the time off to be involved like they are right now. And so that's a huge part of it. But even if it was Corona and it was something else, I don't know. I really don't know. And part of it is because how do you do it? You know, you don't have the leaders. There's nobody, as I said, nobody's being held accountable. You know, police, people in positions that take tax money and all that, they have some accountability, or they should. If there's, you know, gang violence, who are they accountable to? You know what I mean? If it's domestic violence, who are they accountable to? You're accountable to the law, of course, but then we have those issues too. And that's not even the brutality part. That's just the crookedness of the cops part. And maybe I'm just speaking too much for Chicago, but there's a lot of people that profit off this crime, is what I'll say. So that's a whole different issue. But yes, the black on black stuff is talked about, but no, we've historically never pushed like we push with this. And it's, I can't even say it's understandable. It's understandable from the police part, but let's just say it's a George Zimmerman or just any other regular citizen killing a black person. Is it understandable that it is triggered more? I guess maybe. I mean, from my shoes, I think a lot of times you see people that are either innocent or people that deserve, well, just strictly citizen on citizen stuff. It's usually people that are innocent. And so then you have to think about, man, that could be me. I could be in those shoes and be, you know, something could happen to me just because of what I look like. But when you think about black on black crime and some of those issues, I guess maybe we could understand it a little more, especially if you've been around it and you know, like certain ways to avoid that crime or being around that type of crime. But you still kind of understand how that person gets to that point. I don't know. It's hard to negotiate, but I think both are equally issues, but I can understand that some people just don't see them the same. And that's not a good thing, but that is how it is. Now, when we're talking about black people and the harm against white people, that is completely shut down. I will admit that is completely shut down media wise a lot of times. And it's interesting because the conservative side doesn't put plaster that a whole lot either. I mean, obviously they put people in their mug shots and they, you know, all that good stuff. They do that stuff to downplay a black person, but they don't do a whole bunch of the other side of it. You know, they don't post a whole lot of white cops killing white people or or black cops killing white people. They don't really do a lot. You would think they would counter a lot more with it, but I would say in the media overall, you just don't see it a lot. And again, for those that are informed, you would say that's disingenuous. For those that are not informed, you start to think that's reality. And people get mad about that. So it happens. It absolutely happens. It happens on the citizen and citizen level. But it is not talked about as much in the media. That's one. And would people be as upset about it? No. They wouldn't. I mean, it's the historical context argument a lot of times that allows people to justify a lot of things. And there is a time where we have to recognize historical context and we have to use it to understand how we got there. But there's a lot of times where it's just used as an excuse. And so because the historical context of a white man perpetrating against a black man, or white person and a black person, is different than a black person perpetrating against a white person, there's not the same racial history there. People will justify that as a reason not to care as much. Or they'll say, they do it to us all the time, so why should I care if we do it to them? And that's hypocritical. That's 100% hypocritical. So when we unpack all these things, is what she's saying true? Not completely. But is her observation valid? Absolutely. And is it racist? No, I don't think it is. Partly it can push a certain narrative, but that narrative isn't just made up. That narrative comes from real, evidence. And so in my mind, I don't think it's racist. And I think that people need to be careful with just labeling anything that's negative about a black person coming from a white person as racist. And I don't think, she should have got kicked out. And I think that her observations on some levels, there's truth to it. So that's it for me. Go to the comment section. Let me know what you think. Share it around. Get the conversation started. Thumbs up, subscribe, and thank you for going out of bounds.